Hello again, and thank you for stopping by. I do want to say it is time to get comfy and cozy. And tonight I am going to read you the story, The Shadow on the Blind. Harbleton Hall had stood empty for 7 years. For 7 years, no smoke had issued from its chimneys, telling the cheerful hearth within. No voice or laughter had been heard under its roof. No footsteps coming or going across its threshold. A straggling growth of ivy and Virginia creeper that covered the walls and veiled the windows made the front of the house look as foreign and neglected as the face of a sick man who has grown a ragged beard during a long illness. The window sills were green with the drip of rain from spouts choked with decaying leaves, and the brickwork was stained with dark patches of damp. The birds had built their nest undisturbed in every gable and projection of the roof and in the wide chimneys, secure from danger of being smoked out of their comfortable quarters. And within the house, though man had withdrawn his presence from it, other tenants were in possession. Rats and mice held revels in the empty rooms and passages that resounded with the pitter-patter of their feet, the squeak of their voices, and the nibbling of their teeth. In the dead of night, bold as they had grown, they scared themselves by catching in wires that set bells ringing and echoing throughout the house, and an army of rats would rush helter-skelter down the great staircase, bounding over one another's backs in panic, as we see them depicted in the illustrations of the famous history of Whittington and his cat. If desolation reigned in Harbleton Hall, its gardens were returning to a state of savage nature, and the rank growth of weeds choked and overtopped the flowers and shrubs. No seeds had been sown, no lawns mowed, no hedges clipped, or trees or bush pruned in 7 long years, and the once orderly gardens had become a tangled thicket where the fairy prince might seek the sleeping beauty. A bramble had sprung up and by the sundial, clasping it in its thorny arms, threw its branches about, effectually hiding it from the light of day. The stone basin of the disused fountain had become a nursery of young frogs, that hopped, swam, and croaked undisturbed, and nature was endeavoring to re-establish her sway where man had withdrawn his cultivating and restraining hand. It was a radiant day in June. The hot sun poured down on the tangled overgrowth in the gardens of Harbleton Hall. The birds were in perfect riot of song, and the southwest wind rocked them on the bough. Even the old forsaken house on such a day wore its least sombre aspect. One could imagine there had been happy household life within its walls, and it was possible to conceive that they might again resound to the laughter and voices of children at play. Some such thought as this must have entered the mind of an elderly gentleman driving by in an open carriage with his wife, a pale grey-haired lady seated beside him. Mr. Stackpoole was a cheerful, energetic man of 60 years of age, of strong likes and dislikes and sudden impulses. As he caught sight of the wind from the Harbleton Hall, and its red gables glowing in the sun, it confused mass of creepers, almost hiding the lower stories from view, he told the coachman to draw up at the iron gates at the entrance. "This is a very picturesque house, my dear. I should like to have a look at it," he said to his wife. "It may be the kind of place we are in search of," and he alighted from the carriage, as nimble as a young man, to read the notice painted on the weather-stained board fastened to the gates. For admission to view these premises, apply to Mr. Judd Sexton, by the church. Mr. Stackpoole returned to the carriage and bade the coachman drive to the church, the tower of which they could see embowed among trees, apparently not more than a quarter-mile of a distance. As they drove, he continued, "I like the look of the place very much, I am sure. I could do something with it. I should just enjoy setting to work upon it to call order out of chaos, and in 6 months I would undertake to effect an entire transformation in the house and grounds and make it one of the prettiest places in the neighborhood. What do you think, my dear? Hey!" The frail-looking elderly lady thus addressed made but a faint rejoinder, and her husband's sanguine enthusiasms by no means communicated itself to her. Harbleton Hall was the sixth old house to which Mr. Stackpole had taken a fancy in the last 10 years, and fallen out of love with as quickly. After exercising his ingenuity and putting it in perfect order and living in it for a short time, it was his diversion. Now that he had retired from business and had nothing particular to do, to hunt up old country houses, put them through modern repair and working order, live in them just long enough to induce his wife to hope that he had pitched his tent finally, when the demon of unrest would break out in him once more, and he was off again on the old quest. This hunting of houses, catching them and then letting them go, that he might pursue game of the same kind elsewhere, was naturally more entertaining to Mr. Stackpole than it could be to his wife and daughter. But the elderly lady was patient and philosophic, and when her daughter said petulantly, "Oh, mamma, what a shame it is that we have to be dragged about the country like this. We have not been a year in this lovely house, and papa is tired of it already, and looking out again for some tumble-down old place to put that in good order, and leave it too, I suppose," Mrs. Stackpole would say, "Never mind, Ella. Papa must do as he thinks best. The excitement and interest he finds in frequently changing house are necessary to him now that he has done with business. And remember, my dear, he has no home occupations to pass the time, like you and I have." But Ella Stackpole was now married and settled in a home of her own, and the only other child, a son, was stationed with his regiment in Malta. Therefore, it was when Mr. Stackpole became suddenly interested in the appearance of Harbleton Hall, his wife was unable to feel any enthusiasm on the subject. Their last home had been in Cornwall, where, after 6 months spent in its most westerly corner, Mr. Stackpole discovered what everyone else had always known, that he was in decidedly rainy part of England. He could scarcely have been more astonished at the quantity of rain that fell if it had been in Egypt, and he fled to London to make that his headquarters, while he looked about for an old house to suit his fancy in the dreary country of Surrey. And on this bright June day he and his wife were driving through the fair country, house-hunting, and the more dilapidated a house looked, provided that his experienced eye saw capacities of improvement about it, the more attractive it appeared to Mr. Stackpole as affording wider scope for his particular form of genius. His was a costly hobby, and strangers reaped the benefits of his lavish outlay on houses he perfected, tired of, and left so soon. Mr. Judd, the sexton, was found without difficulty, for indeed he was a conspicuous object, sitting in a large armchair by his cottage door, reading the newspaper, and taking an occasional sip from a glass of cold brandy and water that stood beside him on the window-sill. He was a person of dignity in the village, accustomed to waste of his own time and that of others. But Mr. Stackpole hurried him off to the carriage as soon as he found the keys, and compelled him to unwonted activity. "The garden be a wilderness, sir," said the old man, opening one of the great iron gates, "and it's 4 years since there's been an inquiry made about this place." It wouldn't be to everyone's taste, you see. It'll need considerable outlay upon it before it is fit for habitation," said Mr. Stackpole, complacently, as he stopped to disentangle a briar from his wife's skirt. "Who were the last tenants, and how long have they lived here?" he said, turning to the old man and asking two questions at once. "Sir Elode Shaw and his family had it last, sir. They took the place on a 21-years lease. They left uncommon sudden when it had 5 years and more to run. There was a deal talked about what made 'em leave it that way, and Judd opened wide the front door as he spoke, and they entered a large, lofty hall, smelling mouldy, as though there were bolts below. Folks did say there were reasons, more than what they owned up to, for a large family to turn out all of a sudden, as if they were running away from the plague, and the old sexton looked mysterious, and though he longed to be questioned, Mr. Stackpole, however, was too much interested in pacing the length of the dining-room to notice any hints he might throw out. "My dear," he said to his wife, who was resting on the low window-seat, "we will have the whole of this oak floor polished, and Turkish rugs laid down at intervals." "That is just what we did in our house in Cumberland," said Mrs. Stackpole gently, "and if you remember, you were not pleased with it when it was done." Then turning to the old man, "You were going to tell us why Sir Colin Shaw left so suddenly." "Forbid, ma'am, that I should say definite why he left, not knowing for certain," said Mr. Judd, swelling with importance as he spoke. "I never believe more'n half o' what I hear, and puts no faith in tales, whether master's or man's. But what I can make out, and old Jimmy Judd can see through a stone wall as fur as most folks, I should say as ghosts was at the bottom of the whole kick-up." Miss Stackpole smiled at the old man's mode of expressing himself, and then looked anxiously towards her husband, who laughed heartily, and then left the dining-room for the upstairs region, which he was impatient to explore. "They fled before ghosts, did they?" said Miss Stackpole, still laughing at the idea. "If the house is supposed to be haunted, I should like it all the better for its reputation." And he swung open the door of a large, low room with a deep projecting chimney place and wide window letting in a flood of sunshine. "This is certainly a very cheerful aspect," said his wife, stepping to the window and looking out upon the wild garden enclosed by ragged yew hedges. "There is nothing ghostly about this room at all." "Poor ghosts, indeed! Those who believe in them deserve to see them," said Mr. Stackpole, contemptuously. "If we take the house, this shall be your morning-room. You'll get plenty of sunshine, which is a great thing for you, and if I like the room under it, I will have it done up for a business room for myself." And they wandered from cellar to attic of the big house, Mr. Stackpole delighted with the possibilities of the place, and noting in his pocket-book the dimensions of the chief rooms and the entrance hall. "At all events, I shall inquire on what terms the house is to be let," he said, after spending 2 hours energetically inspecting the premises, and as he slipped 5 shillings into Mr. Judd's expectant palm. "By the way, I have not asked, who is the landlord?" "The landlord, sir, be a many and not one," and the old man named a well-known city company to which the property belonged. "I've rented from landlords and landladies and trustees, but never yet from a company. It's all one to me, and I shall see their agent in town tomorrow." Then Mr. Stackpole took a farewell look at the room on the ground floor, immediately under the cheerful room at the head of the stairs, that he had assigned to his wife's prospective use, and decided that it was exactly adapted to his requirements. after which they threaded their way back to the gates through the neglected maze of the garden. "And how do you like the look of Harbleton Hall?" he asked his wife as they drove away. "What do you think of the old place?" I confess that I was not very favorably impressed with it, though it is a handsome, well-built house, and might be made very comfortable, no doubt, but it struck me with a kind of chill. "So would any place, my dear, that had been shut up for 7 years. I feel it is my back now. I wish it may not mean an attack of lumbago for me." Mrs. Stackpole smiled at the literal interpretation of her words. "I don't mean that kind of chill, but a sort of depressed, foreboding feeling that I have never had before in any of the houses you and I have been over together, and their name is Legion." "Why, Anna, you don't mean to say that the tedious old sexton has frightened you with his gossip. It was merely some nonsense or other he had made up to increase his importance. If I take the place, I shall put an army of workmen in a week from now, and when next you see it, with good fires drying the rooms, windows bright and clean, and papers and painters busy upon it, it will look very different, I can assure you. Any house that has been uninhabited as long as Harbleton Hall wears a forlorn look, but for all that I see the possibilities of it, and I could make it the prettiest place we have ever lived yet." And Mrs. Stackpole felt certain that her husband would take the old house. The following day, when Mr. Stackpole saw the company's agent, he was surprised at the very moderate rent asked for the house. Whether he wished to take it on lease or as a yearly tenant, the sum demanded was small enough to arouse suspicion in the most unwary. "Why do you ask such a low rent for a fine old place like that?" he asked. "It is so much out of repair from standing empty so long that I suppose the company is willing to submit a certain loss for the sake of having it inhabited again. But with such a temporarily low rent, how is it that it has not been taken long ago?" "There have been many number of applicants for it. Indeed, the old fellow in charge of the keys showed me over the place yesterday, said that no one had inquired about it for years." A peculiar expression passed over the agent's face, but it was not one of surprise. "He said so, he did? I've had plenty of inquiries." "He certainly said so. He was a talkative old man, and anxious to impress us with the idea that Sir Eland Shaw left Harbleton Hall suddenly, some considerable time before his lease was up, in consequence of an absurd notion that the house was haunted. Now, personally, I care nothing about it, but my wife is sometimes nervous, and I thought I would ask if you know anything of any unusual circumstance connected with his leaving so abruptly." "Judd is a chattering old fool. Did he tell you anything definite about himself?" asked the agent. "Nothing whatever, but he said some nonsense about ghosts driving them away from the place." "Of course, there was an absurd story that got out at the time. It was some hocus pocus with a magic lantern, I believe, got up by the young fellows to frighten the servant with a picture of a skeleton on a sheet hung up somewhere or other. The whole thing was just a stupid practical joke, only too successful, for the scare spread to the ladies of the house, and of course Sir Eland had to leave. They made the place too hot for him," and the agent laughed uproariously. "I remember all about it now you come to ask me. The young Shaws got up in panic for their own purposes. They found the country too slow for them, and they wanted to live in London. So, with the simple apparatus of a magic lantern and a sheet or blind they frightened the family back into the town and got what they wanted. Naturally, Sir Eland used not to speak of it when he found it out, for no one is proud of having been made a fool of. And now, my dear sir, he said, assuming an air of great candor, you know as much about this childish folly as I do myself. It has been magnified into something wonderful till we've had that tempting property on our hands all these years in consequence. Mr. Stackpole was pleased and amused with the agent's frank explanation of the basis of Mr. Judd's mystery allusions, and he and his wife laughed at it together over their evening dinner. Mrs. Stackpole was now willing that her husband should take Harbleton Hall, which he did as a yearly tenant, with the right of taking the property on a lease, if at the end of 3 years he felt inclined to prolong his stay. Then began all the delightful bustle that Mr. Stackpole's soul loved. The drying, warming, painting, lighting, decorating, and furnishing of the house. The taming and reclaiming of the garden. The stubbing up of old lawns and laying down of new turf. He cleaned and regravelled of weed-grown paths. Such an army of workmen was engaged that Mr. Stackpole calculated that in less than 5 months the house would be ready to go into, and the gardens be all cleaned, smooth, and bare in their winter tidiness. It must be finished by the middle of December, he said, that I must keep Christmas here with my family, and if every man has done his work well, and is out of the house by the 12th of December, I will give each one a bonus on his wages, and Christmas supper to you all. No wonder the workmen caught something of Mr. Stackpole's enthusiasm, and that every time he brought his wife to see what was going on, she was delighted with the progress made. All their friends were informed of the lucky find of the beautiful old house in Surrey, and invitations were issued long before the series of entertainments, dances, and private theatricals that they intended to give at Harbleton Hall in the following January, when their daughter, Mrs. Beaumont, and her husband would be staying with them. Shortly before Mr. and Mrs. Stackpole removed to Hambledon Hall, they were dining out one evening, and after the ladies had left the room, the gentlemen had rearranged their chairs comfortably and were seated at their wine. Mr. Stackpole began on his favorite theme, the furnishing and repairing of the old house in Surrey. As most of those present had frequently heard him on the subject before, he was not much heated, and prosed on without interruption till a tall, bald-headed gentleman opposite him caught the words Harbleton Hall and became an active listener. Harbleton Hall, did you say? Do you mean the old gabled red brick house 3 miles from the Mentleton in Surrey? I hope no friend of yours is thinking of taking it. Mr. Stackpole smiled. Not exactly a friend of mine, though probably I know him better than anyone else. I have taken Harbleton Hall myself and intend on moving in to it next December. The deuce you do, said the bald-headed gentleman, setting down his glass. I don't know why it should surprise you, said Mr. Stackpole. Surprise me? Certainly not. Only I thought that the house was empty and likely to remain so. Surely it stood empty long enough for 7 years. It requires an immense deal of doing to it, of course, but I took a fancy to the place, and am putting it into thorough repair, introducing the electric light among the modern improvements. In fact, I am sparing no expense. Do you know anything about Harbleton Hall? I used to do. Sir Eland Shaw, the last tenant, is my brother, and the bald-headed gentleman spoke in a dry, uncommunicative manner, but a hint was not enough for Mr. Stackpole. Then you are the very person to tell me about an absurd story I have heard. It had something to do with a magic lantern. I believe some kind of scare the young people got up to pretend there were bogies in the house and frightened their parents back to town, where they preferred to live. You see, I've heard all about it, and I only want it corroborated by a member of the family. And he laughed heartily, as though it were the best joke of the world. But the gentleman opposite him grew grave to severity and said, I am unable to understand your allusion to a magic lantern performance, which is supposed to have tried my brother's nerves, and absurd is the last word applicable to the circumstance under which Sir Rowland was compelled to leave Harbleton Hall. Then I must have been informed in the matter, replied the undaunted Mr. Stackpole, whose curiosity was now thoroughly aroused. As I am about to live in the house, will you not tell me the real circumstances, that I may be able to contradict the foolish stories that one hears? Why should it be necessary for you to contradict gossip on the subject? Sir Rowland never mentions it. It is possible that sometime you may learn for yourself why my brother left the house. Then I think you will be satisfied that he acted wisely, and if not, I should be sorry to prejudice you against Harbleton Hall. And the gentleman rose to join the ladies, and Mr. Stackpole remained in a state of mystification. Evidently something had happened to drive Sir Rowland Shaw and his family from Harbleton Hall, with which neither old Judd nor the agent was acquainted. What could it be? For himself, so long as it was neither rats nor drains, he did not care. But with his wife it was different. If she had the least inkling that there was anything uncanny about the house, she would refuse to go into it at the 11th hour, or, if she went, would make a point of seeing a ghost the very first dark night. But she must hear no silly talk about it. Any ghost that former inhabitants of the Hall had imagined they saw was when they went about the house starting at their own shadows by the dim light of the oil lamps. The electric light would put all that to rights. It was the best cure for such preposterous folly, and in its illumination Mr. Stackpole felt that he should be more than a match for all the powers of darkness. But shortly after meeting Sir Rowland Shaw's brother, an odd coincidence happened that drew his attention again to the subject of their conversation. Mrs. Stackpole had written to her son at Malta telling him that his father had taken an old house in Surrey which he had fallen in love. How beautifully he was fitting it up, and they expected to keep Christmas in it, and that it was Harbleton Hall that they hoped to welcome him on his return to England. In reply, Jack wrote, So my father is again on the move. Well, this time I am glad he is taking you to a thoroughly accessible place, and not to Cornwall or Cumberland. But is the old house he has taken a fancy to not far from Middleton? I suppose there can't be two Harbleton Halls in the county, but it is odd if it is the house of that name that I have lately heard something about. There was a young civilian out here for his health. He has gone to Egypt now, and he told me that his uncle, a Sir Rowland Smith or some such name, had been fairly driven out of an old house in Surrey by ghosts. I'm sure he called it Harbleton Hall, and he said that his uncle was not in the least a nervous man, but it was more than he could stand, and he had to leave. I wish now I had asked him all about it, but he was such a dull chap. Nothing he said interested me, so I lost the chance of learning particulars. Don't you be timid, dear mother. Let me tackle the bogies when I come home. I should enjoy nothing better. Mrs. Stackpole did not like this at all. It produced an eerie and creepy sensation, and her husband took care not to increase her discomfort by telling her of his conversation with Mr. Shaw. "It is odd, my dear, very odd," he said in his most cheerful tones, "and we are obliged to confess that, somehow or other, someone or other received some sort of a fright at Harbordon Hall. Nothing can be more vague, and yet that is all that is known about it. A pity the whole silly business was not inquired into on the spot, for, of course, it would admit of a perfectly simple solution. Very likely one of the maids had supped rather more heavily than usual on cold pork, and an indigestion waked in her sleep. Someone saw her in white nightgown, took her for a ghost, screamed, and got up for a scare, for it is always easier to cry out than to investigate. And there you have the whole history of a ghost story in a nutshell, my dear. In a nutshell. The workmen were punctually out of Harbordon Hall on the day agreed upon, and as punctually received their pay with their Christmas supper, and the house was ready for the reception of the new tenant, with the good wishes of all who had helped prepare it for him. Mr. Stackpole arranged that they should arrive after dark at Harbordon Hall, that he might surprise his wife with the electric light in every room and passage, and introduce her to her new home under its most cheerful and attractive aspects. As they approached the house, both Mr. and Mrs. Stackpole and her daughter exclaimed with delight, and Ella said it was too pretty to be real. It was like something on the stage. From every window of the house, from the basement to the garret, streamed the pure radiance of the electric light, undimmed by a curtain or blind, sending shafts of light far into the surrounding darkness. From the porch the white light illuminated the drive like a cold sunshine, and showed every pebble on the ground and every twig on bare boughs. "There, my dears," said Mr. Stackpole triumphantly as he led his wife and daughter into the brilliant hall. "This is how modern science drives away foolish fears of darkness by turning night into day. No one could be nervous or afraid of ghosts in a house lighted like this." "No, indeed the thing would be impossible," replied Mrs. Stackpole, her daughter and son-in-law in confident chorus. Christmas was kept with much festivity at Harbordon Hall, and it was impossible to say who was most delighted with the house, the host or hostess, or the guest under its hospitable roof. Each was charmed with his own room, but Mrs. Stackpole's morning room was the general favorite, and afternoon tea was frequently taken there in preference to the more stately drawing-room. The grandchildren played in the empty rooms upstairs on rainy days, and every evening watched the miracle of lighting the house with electric light and breathless interest. They regarded Grandpapa as a light-producing wizard, so that something of awe was mingled with their wildest frolics, and they did not dare to open the door of his own particular room, which was respectfully called the study, though its principal use was to smoke in, or to take a quiet nap before dinner. It was the end of January, and the Stackpoles were daily congratulating themselves on their good fortune in meeting with a house so perfectly suited to all their requirements, when they wound up in their New Year's festivities with a fancy ball. Several young people were staying in the house for the occasion, who were to depart the day after the ball, leaving their host and hostess alone for the first time in their new house. Numbers of guests were coming from a distance, many of whom accepted the invitation out of curiosity, as a dance afforded a good opportunity to spend a night under cheerful auspices in a house with a reputation of being haunted. All of their entertainments so far had been successful, but the last was to be the best, and the host and hostesses threw their whole soul into preparations to ensure its complete success. The room was charming, the floor perfect, the band that came from the town the most renowned of the season. The costumes to be worn were of no special time or country, and the Stackpools themselves set an example of recklessness in the matter, the hostess being dressed as Queen Elizabeth and her husband as Admiral of the Fleet of today, while Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont figured respectively as Japanese lady and Spanish matador. By the time that the guests had arrived, clad in their garb of all ages and countries, the ballroom appeared to contain such a motley throng as the Day of Judgment alone could bring together. Here an ancient Greek danced with a Swedish peasant, and the Black Prince with a female captain of the Salvation Army, and there was a clown, and a nun waltzed gaily past Mahomet and the ballet girl. The electric light was a greater novelty than it is now, and the guests were loud in their admiration of the fairy palace appearance of the house as they approached, and of its brilliance within. Mr. Stackpoole was as delighted as a child with a new toy, and led his friends about, showing them how, merely turning a button on the wall, he could plunge a room into darkness or flood it with radiant light. Dancing was kept up with a great spirit till the small hours, and as the clock in the hall chimed 3:15, the old house resounded to the half-sad and wholly romantic strains of a waltz. The guests who came from a distance had begun to depart, and Mr. Beaumont stood in the porch, laughing, seeing Lady Jane Grey and Flora Macdonald into their carriage. Just then a maid gave a message to one of the footmen to Mrs. Beaumont, who sat fanning herself near the door of the ballroom. "If you please, ma'am, nurse says Master Harry is awake and crying with the music, and says he won't go to sleep till he sees you, ma'am." "Tell nurse I will come directly," and excusing herself to the lady who sat next to her, she slipped out of the room. In the hall she met her father as he was entertaining his study. "I'm going to put this miserable encumbrance by," he said, smiling and nourishing the Admiral's cocked hat, which he had gallantly carried the whole evening to his great inconvenience. "And I am on my way to the nursery to see little Harry," said Miss Beaumont, ran upstairs, softly singing to the sweet music that floated from the ballroom. Mr. Stackpoole laid his hat on the table and looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. 3:15. I'm tired, and the young people ought to be. Hey ho! I'd rather give 10 dinners than one dance," and he yawned profoundly, sank into his low chair by the fire, stretched his legs out before him, and closed his eyes. Sleep fell upon him instantly. For several minutes he was lost in its depths. Light and sound had ceased to exist for him. His brain was steeped in silent darkness. Mr. Beaumont still stood in the porch. The servants had returned to the house, and he was alone. It was a mild winter's night. He flung a cloak over his matador's costume and stepped into the open air. "I shan't be missed for 5 minutes," he said to himself, "while I smoke a cigarette," and he walked briskly along a broad path some 30 yards from the house, from which he had a perfect view of the front of Harbleton Hall. Very pretty, its cheerful brightness looked against the dark background of the star-set sky. Brilliant rays of light shot from the unwrapped windows, and those that had the blinds drawn down shone the outer line of the objects in the room thrown upon them in shadow, as clearly as from a magic lantern. Involuntarily he raised his eyes to the window of Mrs. Stackpole's sitting-room, and stood rooted to the spot. 2 figures, as clearly defined as silhouettes, were visible on the pure square of the blind, the shadows of an old man and a young man struggling together. From the shape of the heads, George Beaumont saw that they wore tie wigs, and there was a clearly cut shadow of the ruffles at the wrists, and the younger and taller man wore large, with richly laced ends around his neck. At first he thought they were guests dressed in costume of the early Georgian period. Then, how they had gone upstairs into that room, or why there was a deadly struggle between them, he did not know. But wonder and speculation was swallowed up in terrified interest as he watched the course of the brief conflict. The elder and shorter man, who stooped considerably, appeared to be unarmed, and seized the younger man by the throat, when he shook himself free, stepped quickly back, drew his sword, and plunging forward on his right foot, ran his opponent through the body. He staggered backwards and fell out of sight below the level of the window, and there remained only one shadow of the younger man and a clear profile on the blind. He stood for a minute looking downward, and George Beaumont had time to observe the finely cut features of a total stranger. Then he saw that he wiped the blade of the sword, turned, and walked away, and his shadow passed out of sight, leaving the window blind a blank, luminous square. Indoors, at the same time, Mr. Stackpole had been waked from his short sleep by a sound in his wife's sitting-room overhead. He sprang to his feet, and with every faculty concentrated in listening. A noise as of chairs pushed back and upset on the polished floor, and a scuffling of feet as though two men were struggling together. Then a moment of silence. A loud stamp, and a heavy fall that seemed to shake the ceiling, followed by a deep groan. "What can be the matter?" cried Mr. Stackpole, and he rushed from the room into the hall. The front door stood open. Through the inner glass doors were closed, and neither his son-in-law nor any servants were there. He stopped to call nobody, but ran upstairs to his wife's room just as his daughter came quickly down from the story above, with a white and terrified face. "Oh, papa! Someone has just frightened me so! But whoever he is in there. I saw him go into mamma's room a few minutes ago, and I'm so glad you've come, for I dare not follow him." And without asking Ella of whom she was speaking, Mr. Stackpole flung the door wide open and rushed into the room. No one was there, not a chair or table displaced, and the electric light illuminating every corner of the room forbade the possibility of anyone being hiding. "It's the most extraordinary thing!" he exclaimed, wiping the perspiration of terror from his brow as he spoke. "I would not have your mother know of it for the world. Have you seen him, too?" his daughter said faintly. "Seen whom, child? Seen what? No, I've seen nothing, but I heard enough to last me my whole lifetime. God forbid that I should hear it again." And he looked about the room and under the table, fairly stupefied with amazement. "He passed me on the stairs just as I came out of the night nursery," said Mrs. Beaumont, anxious to tell her experience without waiting to hear her father's. "A tall young man ran quickly by me, dressed in a blue coat, with ruffles at the wrist, and a great laced cravat, and a wig tied with a ribbon at the back. He carried a long thin sword in his hand. At first I thought it was Arthur Newton, who wore a powdered wig like this evening, but I remember his coat was black, and he left early. When I saw his face it was a stranger's, and he looked cruel and passionate. I followed him till I saw him go in this room and shut the door after him." "Then where the devil is he now?" said Mr. Stackpole. "This is some miserable practical joke, but I'll get to the bottom of it, and be even with them yet. I'll get to the bottom of it." And as he spoke, the door that he had taken the precaution to close burst open, and his son-in-law entered in his matador dress, pale and breathless, looking as if the bull had turned and given him chase. "Oh, George, have you seen him too?" said his wife. "Did you hear anything?" asked Mr. Stackpole. "Sit down, man. You are trembling like a leaf." "There were two of them, an old man and a young man, in this room a minute ago. In God's name, who were they, and why did you not stop them before murder was done?" he said excitedly. Mr. Stackpole grew quiet and self-collected at the sight of his son-in-law's agitation. "Pull yourself together, George, and tell me what you mean. There is something up to night that needs explaining." "But where are they?" "They were in this room, and if you were with them you must have witnessed what happened. Or, if you only came upstairs just now, you must have met the young man leaving the room. The old man will never stir again," and he lifted the tablecloth and looked under the table. "How come you speak confidently of who was in this room a few minutes ago, when you were downstairs all the while?" asked Mr. Stackpole. "I was smoking a cigarette in the garden after seeing the Westons off, walking on the broad path, when I looked up at Mamma's sitting room and window and saw the shadow of two men on the blind. Shown by the electric light as clear and sharp as a magic lantern, I saw their profiles perfectly, but I did not know their faces. They wore wigs tied behind and ruffles at their wrists, and the younger, taller man, as I saw by a shadow, wore a laced steenkirk around his neck. They struggled together, and the old man grasped the young man by the throat, but he tore himself free, drew his sword, and ran him through the body. He fell below the level of the window, out of my sight, and the younger man stood for a minute, wiped his sword, then moved away, and left the blind a blank sheet of white." "Good God! And I heard it all in my room below, the struggle and the fall and deep groans," said Mr. Stackpole. "And I met the young man, if it was anything human, as he passed me on the stairs," said his daughter, seizing her father by the arm. "Oh, papa, Harbleton Hall is haunted. People were right about it. Do let us leave this dreadful place to-morrow." And the concluding notes of the sad waltz sighed through the house as she spoke. Mr. Stackpole shook his head. "I don't see how that is to be done. For your mother must not be frightened. For heaven's sake, try to look as if nothing has happened. We shall be missed downstairs. I'll go, and you two must manage to bid our guests good night decently, and not to alarm those who remain till tomorrow. We must rouse no suspicion. George, fetch Ella a glass of champagne. It will do her good." "Oh, don't leave me alone," cried Mrs. Beaumont, like a frightened child. "Then I'll send wine up for both of you," said her father, "and mind, you must follow me directly." Mr. Stackpole rejoined his guests, who had not missed him, and were in the midst of the last dance with as much freshness and enjoyment as if it had been the first in the evening. At length all the guests had departed except those composing the house party, and the ladies soon retired, leaving the gentlemen to have a smoke in the billiard-room. You don't look very well, Beaumont said, a young man dressed as a peasant, as he lit a cigar and looked up at his friend's pale face. "It's nothing. Only waltzing makes me giddy," and he mixed himself some brandy and soda. One by one the guests bade good night and left the room, till there only remained Mr. Stackpole, his son-in-law, Mr. Liston, a gentleman with very long legs, wearing tights to display them to advantage. "Did your father-in-law know, when he took Harbleton Hall, that it was supposed to be haunted?" he said in a low voice to Mr. Beaumont. Mr. Stackpole happened to hear the question and replied to him. "We heard some foolish gossip on the subject, for of course no place stands empty so long without legends being invented to account for the fact. But I am not the man to listen to your vulgar chatter. I took the house and have been highly delighted with it," and Mr. Beaumont could only admire his father-in-law's admirable self-possession. "Just so, and the electric lights is the true cure for the supposed supernatural. Of course you know how suddenly Sir Rowland Shaw left the place." "Oh, yes, we've heard all about that," said Mr. Stackpole, forcing a laugh. "Do you know, I doubt whether you have ever heard all about it. At least, if you have, you must be a cheerful sort of person if you can laugh at it," said Mr. Liston. "Why, of course, the whole thing was a foolish practical joke, something connected with a magic lantern, if I remember rightly." "Magic lantern? I've never heard the word mentioned. No? If you care to hear the truth about it, I think I can tell it to you. I've lived in the country all my life, and I know the story of Harbleton Hall by heart. I only wonder you don't. I should not tell you now if I thought it would make you nervous, but since you put in electric light and done up the house in such a cheerful modern style, and the whole place is changed, and anyone might enjoy living here. Let us hear the story," said Mr. Stackpole abruptly. "I see I've roused your curiosity. The story goes that some 150 years ago there lived in this house a certain father and son who hated one another like the devil, and it is needless to say that there was a woman in the case and a fortune at stake. The old man must have been an uncommonly bad lot, and he's said to have grossly insulted the young lady his son was about to marry, having in the first instance proposed to her himself and been refused. The two men had deadly quarrel about it in this very house, and the upshot was that the son, mad with passion, ran his father through the heart and killed him on the spot. There, I shan't say anything more about it if it is too much for you, said Mr. Liston, struck by the white faces before him. Go on, said Mr. Stackpole. Well, one winter's night, now 8 years ago, as Sir Rowland Shaw was coming home late, walking across the garden, he looked up at the window of the room on the first floor, where a light was burning, and he saw on the blind, in clear outline, the shadows of the old man and his son struggling together, and he saw the young man run his father through the body with his rapier. I cannot bear it, said George Beaumont, pale as death and looking ready to faint. You could but say that if you had seen the grim shadows yourself, it certainly is a horrid story. And though I can't say that I believe in ghosts myself, I can offer no explanation of the details I have given you. Sir Rowland believed it, and he was clear-headed, matter-of-fact sort of person. Only members of his family, too, saw and heard unaccountable things that night. One of his sons, who was sitting up late for his father, met the shadow of an evil-looking fellow dressed in a blue coat and wearing a powdered tie wig, hurrying along the upper passage, carrying a naked rapier in his hand, and Lady Shaw was awake by a sound in the room next hers, which was the room where the shadows were seen on the blind, a sound of struggling and upsetting of chairs, followed by a heavy fall and deep groans. Now, if only one person had thought he had heard or seen unaccountable things, Sir Rowland would have made the best of it and stayed on at Harbleton Hall. But, by Jove, when three rational beings are each an eye or ear witness, it becomes intolerable. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, you can't put up with a thing like that. By heavens, you can't, that's true, said Mr. Stackpole, wiping his moist brow. And now, Liston, that you have told me this, I'll tell you something in return. And I and my family leave Harbleton Hall tomorrow, for the precise reason that drove Sir Rowland Shaw out of it 8 years ago. Never. As sure as I am alive, we leave here tomorrow. I must find some reason for our sudden flight, but go we must, and I cannot have my wife alarmed. I would not spend another night in this house for the world, said Beaumont. But My dear Mr. Stackpole, I hope that nothing that I have said leads you to make this extraordinary resolution. Your imagination is excited by what you have heard. There cannot possibly be any cause why you should leave this charming place that you have just fitted up to your own taste, said Mr. Lisson soothingly. The story you have told us has only helped to explain what we already know. I tell you that this very night, not a couple hours ago, in the blaze of the electric light and with the house full of company, Beaumont, my daughter, and myself have seen and heard the sights and sounds that drove Sir Roland Shaw out of Harberton Hall, and we leave tomorrow, or rather today, for it is nearly 6 o'clock. Now, never to spend another night under this accursed roof, and Mr. Stackpole's voice shook as he spoke. I have only to request, he added, that you will treat this communication as strictly confidential, for neither Beaumont nor I shall care to speak or to be spoken to about what has occurred tonight. Where was Mr. Stackpole's intelligent curiosity on the subject of ghosts, and what had become of his courage? The only one been satisfied and the other daunted, and he had not the slightest desire to remain the investigative mystery. At late breakfast, Mrs. Stackpole was shocked by the appearance of her family. It would have been difficult to say which was most pale and haggard, her husband, her daughter, or her son-in-law. They made the poor excuse that late hours did not suit them and that dancing knocked them up, and she told them that they looked like very young children who had been to their first pantomime the night before. When the last guest was gone, Mrs. Stackpole saw that there was something seriously disturbing her husband, and was at a loss to account for his changed humor. My dear, we will go up to town this afternoon with George and Elle, he said with a quick decision. Impossible, replied his wife calmly. You, of course, can go if you like, but I really cannot. Oh, do come with us, mamma. You know how much papa wishes it, said his daughter. Yes, do come with us, urged the son-in-law with unwonted ardor. It is so long since we met, forgetting that we had spent the last month together. Mrs. Stackpole laughed. There is evidently some deep-laid plot among you three to hurry me off. Well, if you will be any happier for my coming with you, I'll do so, though it is most inconvenient to leave home in this sudden way, said the good-tempered lady. And they travelled up to London that day, never to return to Harberton Hall. Mr. Stackpole so managed that his wife did not know his real reason for giving up the most charming house they had ever lived in. He preferred that she should attribute it to his restlessness and caprice, anything rather than that her nerves should be shaken by hearing the truth. He consulted a fashionable physician, first giving him a hint that he wished to be ordered off to the south of France immediately, and the hint being taken, he told his long-suffering wife that Dr. Blank had recommended him to go abroad at once, and in 2 days they were en route for Marseilles. Mrs. Stackpole was accustomed to her husband's impulsive, angular movements, so that it did not greatly disturb her. But when a week later he said that he had decided to give up Harberton Hall and to go look for a place somewhere in the eastern countries, which were as yet untrodden ground to him, she shed tears of present disappointment and prospective fatigue. When the much-enduring lady had dried her eyes and her husband had enumerated to her in detail every reason but the real one for which he was leaving their beautiful home, she said, My dear, if I did not know better, I should be forced to believe you too had seen the ghost that frightened Sir Roland Shaw out of the Harberton Hall 8 years ago. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's story. Feel free to subscribe, like, or leave a comment. I would love to hear what you think about the story.